We want to say welcome and thank you for joining us for the iReady Family Information Session. This session will run about 1 hour long. We have a lot of information to go through, but please don't hesitate to ask questions. That's what Allison and I are here for. That being said, we'll go ahead and make some introductions and do some Zoom norms. Welcome. Hi, my name is Jackie Garcia. I am an MTSS prevention specialist for our district. MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And what we do is we identify students that need extra supports in language arts at our focus sites. I do currently serve 6 different sites within the district.
And I'm Allison Smith. I'm also an MTSS intervention specialist at 5 different sites right now, and glad to see everyone here.
Okay, so Roberto actually went over a couple of our Zoom norms, but just because we're together for about an hour and we again have a lot of information to cover, we are asking that you mute your microphone. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Allison will be running the chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them there and we will answer them upon the earliest convenience.
Okay, so our agenda for this afternoon, we're going to talk about just what is iReady and just give you some general information about 2 of the main components. One of them being the diagnostic assessments or tests that you might have been hearing about these past couple weeks, and then the weekly lessons. We're going to go over how you, parents and caregivers, can help your child at home, and then also some tips about how to communicate with teachers.
Okay, so the first big question is, what exactly is iReady? You might have heard your children talking about, oh, I have to get onto iReady to do my minutes. So we wanted to outline a little bit more in depth what iReady is. It is an online program that your students can access through their apps portal. The program focuses on reading and 5 different domains of foundational reading blocks. Through the diagnostic test, your teacher can determine the strengths that your students are exhibiting with their reading and also their needs, their areas of improvement. After the diagnostic, what the program does, it will personalize or tailor the program to fit your students' needs in order to fill in any gaps that your students are showing within those 5 domains. And we will be talking a little bit more in depth about those domains in a moment. Throughout the school year, your teacher will monitor your students' progress. We also highly encourage teachers to celebrate your students' progress and successes. And what happens is hopefully at the end of the year, the program has been designed to meet your students' needs exactly where they are through the data. iReady consists of 2 major parts, like Allison had said. That would be the diagnostic, which leads your student into personalized instruction. And that being said, we have a very short video from the iReady program themselves.
Hi, my name is Mark Bernstein. I'm a National Director at Curriculum Associates, and we are the iReady people. For the student, iReady serves 2 functions. Number 1, it's an online diagnostic assessment that pinpoints math and reading skills down to the sub-skill level. And number 2, it's online learning that caters to a student's specific needs, whether those needs are on, above, or below level. I'd like to share 4 things you need to know about iReady. Number 1, the iReady online assessment is adaptive in nature. This means that students see questions based on how they're performing. If a student struggles, the questions get easier. If a student is breezing through, the questions become more challenging. Once a student completes the diagnostic, the teacher will know exactly what this student needs, so it eliminates the necessity to overtest our children, thus allowing more time for teaching. Number 2, the iReady online instruction is personalized to the individual. Once a student completes the diagnostic, his or her results will differ from classmates, so we give each student their own pathway based on diagnostic results. If a student needs help with reading comprehension, that student will get lessons to help. If a student has geometry skills above grade level, that student will receive geometry content that's above grade level. Support for those who have gaps to fill, enrichment for those who are exceeding grade level expectations. Number 3, iReady is not a grading tool. Your child won't get an A or C- based on how they perform in iReady. iReady supports students, challenges students, gives students math and reading content that is right at their level. iReady helps children to grow, but it is not used to assign grades. And number 4, iReady is not designed to replace the teacher. In every school district, teachers are an irreplaceable asset. iReady supports teachers by helping group students with similar needs for targeted instruction, what we call differentiation. Once small groups are established, iReady's teacher toolbox is just one of the many resources that teachers may use to provide targeted instruction. But replace the teacher? Never. Thank you very much for watching this video. We look forward to seeing your students succeed with iReady.
Thank you. And for anyone who's wondering, we know that an hour again is a really short amount of time. We will be dropping the entire presentation for you to reference back at your own convenience, which will also include a video. Okay, so we wanted to give you a bird's eye view of what exactly the iReady program looks like throughout the year for your student. So I wanted to briefly explain just kind of the roadmap of what the program looks like, and then Allison and I will be going a little bit more in depth about what each section means. So looking at a year's work on iReady, your student will be working on 3 different diagnostics. The diagnostic is going to identify, again, the strengths that your student currently exhibits in reading foundations and any areas that they need improvement on. I put a star exactly where we are right now. As of last Friday, September the 10th, we finished the window diagnostic 1. So when the window closed on Friday, teachers and the MTSS specialists and principals were able to go into each classroom to see the results of how your students performed. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about the domains in a moment. It is called a universal screener. All students 1st grade to 9th grade took the first diagnostic. It was determined that kindergartners are still too young because they're acquiring just being a student right now. So we did not want to overwhelm the kindergartners with the test. So they will take their first diagnostic in January. Right now, the program has identified what lessons your students will benefit from until the next diagnostic. So starting today, Monday, after the diagnostic window, your students will be given an instructional path. This is tailored to your own students' needs. So there are friends at their table or across the room or another classroom. Everyone's going to be at a different instructional rate. Okay. In January, at the beginning of the 2nd trimester, the students will be taking diagnostic 2. At this point, the instructional path will change. Okay, the different goals are going to change. We're hoping that students made a lot of progress through working their way through the first set of instruction. And then after the diagnostic window closes, they'll go ahead and continue with their new instructional path until trimester 3. And at trimester 3, your students will take their end of the year diagnostic. And the data reports will be showing all interested parties, the students, the parents, the specialists, the teachers, and the principal, how much growth your student has made throughout the year. And growth won't be made unless your student is actively engaged in the program. And we'll talk a little bit more about goals in a moment. Allison, are there any questions?
No, I just have, let's see, what do kindergartners do from now until January? So that's a good question. They're just not yet in the iReady program. So they're learning about school, they're learning their foundations in learning how to read like they would normally do in any kindergarten classroom. Anything you want to add to that, Jackie?
And that's it. Yeah, very good.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about the diagnostics. So what are they? They are just a reading test or reading assessment that's adaptive. And what adaptive means is if you look at this graphic here, and Jackie, maybe you can put your pointer over it, that first green dot on the image there. Perfect. So that represents like a test question. So for example, if your student, it looks like that range there from K to 12, the student might be like, I don't know, a 7th grade student or something. When on the question, if they get it correct, then the test adapts. And the next question is a little bit more challenging. So it goes up to the next dot there. But let's say, for example, they missed that question. So the test is going to adapt again, and it's going to take that next question down a little bit lower of a level. Well, maybe they missed that question again. The test is going to continue. It's going to go down again. Oh, maybe they missed it again. The test is going to continue to adapt. Now, on the next question, they get it right. And the following question after that might be a little bit more challenging, and they get that right. But what you can see in this graphic here is that the test is just moving and changing based on how your student is doing. And this helps pinpoint and narrow down what are the exact skills that my student is doing well with in reading, and what are the areas that they might need some more help with. So like Jackie mentioned, the diagnostics are given at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year. Why? What's the point of them? It helps teachers decide how to best help your student in reading. And like was mentioned before in the video, it's not meant to be for grading purposes. And how? They're given on the computer. Usually the testing window might be a 3-week window, but your student really might only be testing for 2 different sessions of maybe 30 to 40 minutes, depending on the age and grade level. Not a time test, so they can take more time if they need it.
Okay, so like I had mentioned, the window for the first diagnostic closed on Friday, September the 10th. So it just recently closed. And what we're hoping happens is that your child's teacher is going to send to you a diagnostic result document. It's a 1-page paper that looks very similar to this. On the very top of it, you'll see your child's name and their grade and the teacher's name. And then you're going to see a bulk of the information will look just like this. Now,
okay, what if my son's teacher was gone for 2 weeks and I can't get that? Because I don't know if the substitute did what they were supposed to. Because for one, they didn't send home any homework for 2 weeks. So I don't know if they did the iReady.
Well, the specialists were, every single elementary school and middle school is assigned to one of the specialists. And it was our job to make sure that even though the classrooms had substitute teachers in them, that the students were making, it was a priority that they took this diagnostic test. So I'm not sure what school you're at, but hopefully the test was done. Each principal was tasked with getting a maximum of 95% of their school site done. So it was a big initiative to make sure that we had a lot of students on getting it done. Even if they were at home during quarantine, we were making calls out to families to let them know that they could still take the diagnostic. I don't know the details of your particular son's teacher and whether it was done, but I'm hoping it was. I would reach out. Does the teacher back to you now?
Yes, he's back now.
Perfect. I would definitely reach out to them via email or phone call to ensure that your student did take the test. If he didn't finish, he can still take it. The only the window closed, what that means is that the data that we see within that window It's very easily to see all the data that's in that window, but if your student didn't finish it, he can still do it. The teacher would just have to change the dates into a customized form.
Okay.
And then we're going to actually show you how you can log on to your son's student's dashboard to see if he finished or not. We'll show you a snapshot of that.
Yeah, I know how to do all that.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
I know
Okay,
how to
perfect.
do all that because of kindergarten. So yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, fantastic. So I hope that I answered your question in depth.
Yes, you did.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully your child's teacher will be sending you this one-page summary of the diagnostic result. And we just wanted to pinpoint some very important areas so you have a better understanding of what the results mean. Okay, so if you look at the first dot, this is the blue line indicates what your students scored. Okay, now if you look at the green, I'm jumping a little ahead. If you jump to the green section is the scaled score of where your student should have landed if they were determined to be on grade level. So looking at this student named Quinn, this is just a made-up student, you can see that the student did not meet grade level standards yet. Okay, so this area in between is considered the gap that your student needs in order to meet grade level standards in reading. Okay, this gap right here is what you're going to see. All those lessons that your student is getting during the weekly instructional path is what's helping to close this gap. So the end goal is that by diagnostic 2 that you see a close in the gap, that it's getting closer, and hopefully by the end of the year, your student's blue line is all the way into the green. That is the number one goal that we have. Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit. Let me go back to number 2. Number 2 indicates where the student placed per grade level. And this fake test result right here is for a first grade student, the beginning of the first grade student. Okay, number 4 on the bottom is going to indicate your student's scale. You want to compare that scale score to how close they are to being on grade level. So if you look, and it's very tiny, I do apologize. But if you look at the green numbers, if your student scored between 434 or 536, if they were a beginning first grader, they would be considered on grade level. So the area number 4 indicates how close they are or how far away they could be from being considered on grade level. Allison and I have spoken a little bit about domains. So the domain, we're going to talk a little bit more about what they are, but the domains are listed here. And then next to it, and I don't have my laser, I'm sorry. These are the domains that are being tested for iReady and the diagnostics. And then how your students scored for each domain is right here. And again, this fake report is for a beginning first grader. Okay, the domains are listed in order of how your students should be mastering their basic reading blocks. Okay, we always start with phonological awareness. Then you move on to phonics. Once you've mastered phonological awareness, the area would be high frequency words, otherwise known as sight words, then vocabulary, and then the last 2 are going to be comprehension. And iReady tests your students in both literature, literary comprehension, and informational text. In other words, fiction versus nonfiction.
And Jackie, let's pause right there for a minute so we can address a couple questions coming up.
Sure.
So one of the questions was, how do I get those results from my daughter's school? And we're going to be addressing that in a couple slides, how you can talk to your teacher about getting those results if you haven't already. Another question was, how are parents being informed about the diagnostic testing prior to it being administered? Would that be from school sites, if school sites are sending out information to parents?
Yes, so our job as MTSS specialists is to prepare teachers for big initiatives that we have coming up, and iReady is one of our main jobs. So what we do prior to the test is we send out a slide deck that includes a video with the iReady characters. We send that out to teachers to show the students. It gives tips on how students can prepare, getting a good night's rest, eating a good breakfast, focusing. In addition to the student slide deck, we also send out information that is geared towards the parents. And it's up to the teacher to make sure the best way to communicate the diagnostic to the parents, whether it be because we're now in this new blended learning model with the computers. We did create one that could be easily added to the Google Classroom, or it can just be something that they add to an email. So we are depending a lot on us getting our communications, taking it to the teachers, and having the teachers also explain to the families about the iReady test. And we do that 3 times a year. So you're going to see that for each diagnostic. The next diagnostic will be coming up at the very beginning of January, right after winter break. And then the third one comes sometime prior to spring break. And then, of course, diagnostic one is, it occurs about 3 days in the school year. So
thank you. And then another question I want to be sure to address, which I think is a great question, is, so is iReady replacing in-class teaching? Are kids going to forever be looking at a screen? I think that's a really great question. And iReady absolutely does not replace in-class teaching. iReady is an extra support to help students, develop their reading, but that in-class teaching is so important and essential to developing literacy in students. So what iReady does, part of what it does is that diagnostic assessment helps give a lot of data to teachers and schools and principals. So we can really be precise with, okay, this child is doing really well. We're about to get into these domains of reading, for example, in phonological awareness and phonics, but they're really struggling with vocabulary, or they're really struggling with comprehension. So that allows your child's teacher to really hone in and maybe work with your student in a small group on, say, comprehension, because that's the area where they're really struggling. Or, for example, they can use this data to look at their whole class and say, okay, most of my students are in this area, so I'm going to gear my whole class lessons here. But I have a couple students who are struggling over here, so I'm going to pull them into a small group to provide some extra support for them. So it does not replace that in-class teaching.
that is a very good question. Yes.
And then there was one more question I wanted to get to before we move on. Where did it go? Oh, so there were a couple questions about just when does 5th grade get iReady, and is this a free program? When can my student get it? All students in Twin Rivers through 9th grade, kindergarten will be starting in, like she mentioned, in January, have access to iReady through their classrooms. So if you haven't seen it yet, that's something that you can talk to your child's teacher about, and we're going to get to some questions you might want to ask. So I'm thinking let's move on to this screen, which is the domains of reading, the 5 main areas that iReady is looking at and that are assessed. So this is a typical order of progression for developing reading skills. So if you look at that first red area of phonological awareness, that's just basically understanding the sounds that letters make. So at that very basic level, we know the letter A makes those sounds, ah and A. As students begin to progress in their reading, we move into the area of phonics, which is understanding word parts and sound patterns and how to put them together to read words. High frequency words are just those really common words that we see in text, and you might see lists coming home from your child's teacher. This is something that teachers often ask students to memorize. And then the domain of vocabulary is really not only just understanding the meaning of new words, but being able to use these words to make sense of more complex texts. And then finally, that area of comprehension. Jackie mentioned it's in both literature, so things like stories and plays, and in informational text, things like articles or like a science text, for example. And that includes understanding it, but also being able to really analyze what's being read. So for example, can the student identify the theme of the story? Can they identify the main idea? Are they able to find evidence to support an opinion? So these are the main areas that they're being assessed on in the diagnostic, and then the areas that their lessons will be based on depending on their need. And Jackie's going to talk next about those weekly lessons and goals.
Okay, so thank you, Allison, for reviewing what the domains mean. In order to put it into an analogy or a visual of what exactly is happening when your students begin their weekly lessons, which started today, by the way, is the program has identified the areas of need and where your students need lessons to help build up their strength in that domain. I like to think of it as a ladder. So what the iReady program has done has identified where exactly on this ladder of the domain where your student landed. So pretend that this was a domain right here. The ladder right here was the domain of vocabulary. And after the diagnostic test, the program identified your student as understanding all of these lessons on the bottom. They mastered these, everything was great, but they got stuck at the halfway mark of mastering the vocabulary domain. So what the program has done was it has identified that this is all of these lessons is where your student needs to continue learning and strengthening and bulking up their understanding. And then every week they're going to be getting lessons on the vocabulary areas that the program identified that they needed. They need to pass each lesson at 67% in order to progress up the rungs of the ladder. And after, it gets different as your child is adapting, but after a certain number of lessons, your student is given a quiz. If they pass the quiz, then they're going to be progressing up this ladder until they reach mastery. Once your student has reached mastery, then they no longer have to focus on lessons in this domain. Okay, so that is the goal of iReady. So every week when your student is logging on and they are given different lessons, all it is doing is helping them to progress up the rungs of this ladder. Okay, I hope that makes sense. The district has set goals for students per week, and this is something that teachers need to abide by. They need to be helping your student to make sure that their weekly goals are met. I'm really grateful for the question about, does this replace in-class teaching for language arts? And the answer is absolutely not. The weekly goal is that your student is engaging in iReady between 30 to 45 minutes per week. Not any less than that and not any more than that. Okay, and teachers have been asked to embed iReady time at a certain point throughout their day. And the goal is for littles, for young students, that they do not do more than 2 sessions at 15 minutes each, because the older students should be looking at comprehension. Those comprehension passages tend to be pretty lengthy, and that's why there's the 45-minute suggestion. That's meant for the older students because they have to do those really long reading passages and then answer questions that correspond with it. Okay, and again, I had mentioned that to pass a lesson in iReady, it's at 67%. We look at your students' average. So as they're progressing through the lessons throughout the entire year, we look at the average of year to date of all the combined lessons that they've done. And the district wants students to be passing at a rate of 70% or higher. Okay, we have embedded some incentive programs in that, which I'll go over in just a moment. Allison, I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat box.
Yeah, so I'm responding to a couple, and then there
Okay.
to be this kind of a similar question about like, how do I read the score? How do I see this? We're going to be getting there. So I think we can continue on and we'll get there in a moment.
Yeah. I did want to address one more important thing. This is super important. The question is, why is it important to track your students' progress? The reason is if we have a teacher who's getting really busy and the everyday things of teacher life, and they're not paying attention to the students' reports, there could be a potential of a student who is accessing iReady for 30 to 45 minutes, if not more per week, but not passing. If they're not passing their lessons, what happens is after 4 attempts to pass and they keep failing, that domain is going to shut off. Okay, and the teachers are not paying attention to their reports and looking at the flags where it indicates that the domain is shut off. What the program does, it's going to move on to another domain. And it's going to ask the students to work their way up the rungs of that domain, which is okay, except that meanwhile, all the lessons that they haven't passed in the domain that was shut off ends up stacking. And so when the teacher finally comes back to turn the program on, the student is going to be overwhelmed with a bunch of stacked lessons that they weren't able to get to because that domain was shut off. So as one of the jobs of us as the intervention specialists is we highly encourage and we train our teachers to look at their reports at a minimum of once a week. As a classroom teacher, I was in the habit of sitting with my entire class and projecting our weekly lessons and the reports every Monday morning. And we were able to look and find out who was passing and if anyone had flags on, turning them on. I made it very intentional as a classroom teacher to pay attention to what those weekly reports were saying. And so that is why it's really important that we pay attention to what students are doing to make it worth their while. If they're working hard and investing the time in this program, we want to make sure that they're successful.
Okay, so how can you help at home? So for those weekly lessons that Jackie was just describing, if they are doing them at home, so like she mentioned, so teachers, mostly they're providing some time in class, and it kind of depends on the grade level. One of the schools that I support is a junior high school, and so those 7th and 8th graders have some time in class, but they also are expected by their teachers to finish up their weekly minutes at home. So if your student is doing iReady at home, you want to make sure that you have a space for them, a place where it's quiet, or they have headphones, their computer is charged. You know, it's a place where they can really concentrate and focus on that iReady time. You know, another thing you can do is just talking to your students about making a plan and what do they need to stay focused, and encouraging them and making it a positive experience. Can you click to the next one, Jackie? Supporting them, so keeping them motivated, just checking in with them, encouraging them to take their time, and paying attention to how they're doing with their lessons, helping them track their progress. So we're gonna, in a couple slides, we'll be looking at some resources that you can access online, such as like a little chart that you could, you know, print out, or that you could make at home, and they could put stickers, they can mark it off. Maybe there's some type of incentive at home, that a prize or something that they can work towards. And then the last clip, which is also just about celebrating their progress. You know, we don't want kids to hate iReady. We don't want them to burn out on it and that they're just doing it for hours on end. We want it to be a positive experience. And I've heard a lot of stories about how students who do have a positive experience because they're prepared with the space and an environment, a time to do their iReady lessons, and they can concentrate, that they really do make great gains in their reading, and it's something that they feel really proud about. So parent and caregiver, you can be there to celebrate them as they're reaching either their weekly goals or as they're working and making gains in their assessment results. You can go to the next slide. So here's what a lot of people are asking: how do I check my child's progress? So from the student facing part of iReady. If they're at home and you look at their screen, there's this My Progress button down there at the bottom. And you can click on that and you will be able to see. So if you look at the 30 minutes there, for example, you can see the time on task for that week. So if their goal is for them to do 30 to 45 minutes per week, we can see, oh, this student is already at 30 minutes. The bar graph part, the number 2, you can look at how many lessons they have passed this school year. And then the number 3, you can see their lesson streak. So kind of like how many consecutive lessons they've been able to pass in a row. You can also, if you click down there, the number 4, the completed work, you can see the name and the quiz score for each of the lessons they have taken. So you can see what they've been working on and how they scored. And then I just want to pause, and maybe you can address this, Jackie. One of the previous slides, we showed the diagnostic report. So if you could maybe just address that again, that if your child had, or if you haven't seen that come home, that's something that you could ask your teacher for. Yeah, so that's how I think. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, yes. And again, we have been encouraging teachers and giving them explicit directions on how they can go into the iReady program and retrieve those one-page summaries for parents. And with the new adventure of all this online learning, it's really easy to send a PDF form. So you can ask for either a PDF form, so you get it in a digital form, maybe through your email, or if you like the handheld paper copy, you can ask your teacher to print that for you as well. Okay, so that leads us in, it's perfect timing, and communicating with your student's teacher. So Allison and I were both classroom teachers. I have experience working directly with iReady program as a teacher. So I have that background knowledge. And when we were planning this presentation, we sat and brainstormed some really important questions that parents or caregivers could ask their student's teacher in regards to iReady. And so these are just some ideas, and we can go over each of them. So the first question is, how did my student perform on the iReady diagnostic test? You can ask for the diagnostic results paper, and that's what we went over, is that one sheet summary. If you are more interested in a detailed report, you can ask your child's teacher to send you a copy of the detailed report. The detailed report, it goes through each of the different domains, and it tells you explicitly how your student performed, and it also gives a list of ideas of what you can do to help support them. So for example, if they scored low in the high frequency word or sight word section, it would give you ideas on what you can do at home to help support them to start learning those and mastering those. The next question is, how can I know if my student is working on iReady and reaching goals? Okay, so hopefully the teacher can give you a good idea of your student and how much they're engaging. But you can also ask your student to take out their Chromebook and to log into their apps portal and to show you their student dashboard. And that's the screen that Allison had gone over, where you can look at their minutes on time on task, and they can also show you how many lessons they've been working on and what their scores were. And you can tell if they have been passing those quizzes or if they're not passing. You have an option of reaching out to your child's teacher as well. That's the next question. What happens if the lessons are too easy for my student? Or what happens if the lessons are too hard for my student? So teachers also have the option of adjusting your student's lesson path. So going back to that ladder analogy, if your student is mastering every single quiz and lesson at 100% and they're saying that it's too easy and it's boring, then your teacher could move your student up the rungs so they can encounter more challenging lessons. Opposite, if they're too hard, then your teacher can bring your student backwards down the ladder a little bit until they're at a level where they're able to access the quizzes and they're not too difficult for them. Okay, how do you reward my students' progress? That is a very legitimate question to ask your student's teacher. After all, your students are putting in a lot of time and effort and work on getting up that ladder. So hopefully teachers are being mindful and they have some kind of reward process in place for them. Okay, we're going to talk about some ideas in a moment that teachers should be doing. And Allison, can you read that last question aloud because the menu is covering it for me?
Sure. The last bullet point
Yes.
is, my student understand their diagnostic score and weekly progress.
Thank you. So for the last 2 weeks, while students have been working on the diagnostic, we have been encouraging teachers to make time to do something called a data chat with your student. A data chat is letting your student know exactly what the whole iReady program is. It's helping them to set goals for themselves. And then it's also explaining where they landed and where they need to be. There have been a lot of studies that shown that if students are active participants in their learning by setting goals and knowing their results, they tend to do a lot better. So we have been outreaching to teachers to show them. We've given them different types of data chats, some that are very simple, very quick, like a half sheet, up to some pretty intense leveled ones where the students, if they're older especially, can look at their scaled score to see how far away they are from mastery in each domain. And again, I did this as a first grade teacher. First graders are completely capable of setting goals for themselves. I had them color in. I showed them where they needed to be to master that domain. And then I had them actually color in where they were. And then we talked about what the gap meant and what goals they were making for themselves to make sure that they reach that next rung on the ladder. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, let's see. Kindergarten parents get information how to log in, or are we waiting until January?
I do have a pending question out right now to see whether or not kindergartners can access their weekly lessons without taking the diagnostic. I am absolutely sure that they were not given the diagnostic test because they are so brand new to school. But I want to say that I think they have access to their weekly instructional plans. If they're having trouble logging into that apps portal, the teachers can print out a QR code. It's a little card where the kindergartners can actually put it up to the screen and it reads your students' login information from the card. So that's something that I would definitely talk to your student's kindergarten teacher about. And again, I'm waiting for clarification if kindergartners are able to directly access their lesson path right now without taking that diagnostic test. I haven't heard back yet, so.
Another kind of common question we're seeing is about students being assigned more than the 45 minutes per week. We're seeing like 60 minutes, 80 minutes.
The district goal is 45 is the maximum. And I'm wondering is it an older student? Because if it's an older student, again, the older the students are and the more mastery they are through that comprehension domain, if they're actually making really good progress and progressing up, those passages do end up being very long, and they are pretty lengthy. And so I'm wondering if that's why the teacher set it to be 60 minutes. 80 minutes is kind of high. So I might reach out to ask the teacher why it's 80 minutes when the district recommendation is 45. That could be, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know why they would make it that high.
Yeah, thank you. And then another question is, so I'm seeing my student fail a lesson multiple times. Is there build and review of the same lesson. Do you want to address that?
I would definitely reach out to the teacher to let them know, and hopefully the teacher would go in to adjust the student's lesson path. They wouldn't take them down to a next or a lower grade level. That would be impossible. But what they can do is they can move the student a little bit backwards on that ladder, a little bit backwards on the rung. And so reviewing those lessons and getting the extra support that they need. And then they're continuing on their journey up the ladder.
Okay. Let's move on.
Okay, so we are definitely encouraging teachers and school sites. We also work closely with the principals and vice principals to encourage incentives. So we recognize that students are putting in a lot of time, a lot of work to pass these lessons. We want to encourage them and make it fun for them and have something to look forward to as they're working through. To that end, and the first picture is the data chat that I was talking about earlier. The teachers can print these out in a hard copy, or they can actually send it to the Google Classroom and have the students fill this out digitally. Okay, it's really good practice for teachers to train the students on looking at their student dashboard so they can find their own scores and write it down. And then in the boxes, they can jot down some areas that they felt they did well in and some areas that they need to improve on, and then setting some goals. So this is an example of what the data chat looks like. One of the major initiatives that we send out for incentives is a pom-pom jar. So each week, teachers should be looking at their reports, students who have met both their usage at 30 to 45 minutes per week and passing their lessons at 67% or higher. And each time they have met either of those goals, they put a pom-pom in the jar, and then the teacher sets classroom rewards. So it might start off as a popcorn party once the jar is full, or an ice cream party, and then it can progress up to a pizza party if they so are inclined. I've talked to a principal pretty recently about doing a school incentive where if the school is adding pom-poms into the jar, then maybe there could be a pie in the face, or the teacher teaching on the roof of the school for the day. Just things to keep it very exciting and motivating for our students. And then for the elementary age students, we have a character in iReady called the Snarg, and we do grade level competitions. So whichever class has earned the highest average of lessons passed, and if students are engaging with their usage, then they've earned the Snarg for the week. And in fact, this weekend, I spent the entire time putting Snargs into my washing machine to make sure that they were ready for my schools. So that's something that you can definitely have conversations with your students about. I know that at one of my sites, we're planning on putting a big bulletin board in the cafeteria just to make it more visual and interactive for the students, and really just to let them know that we are paying attention to what they're doing.
Okay, so we are nearing the end of our presentation today, and we want to leave you with some resources that you can access after. Like we mentioned, we are going to be dropping the link to this entire slides presentation in the chat, so you can grab that. We'll also drop this iReady website link, which is their family center, and they regularly update it with new information. They have videos and tips and things like the document you see here in the center, those at-home student trackers that you can download and have access to, and they have them in a lot of different languages. So it's a really great resource there. And then the fridge tips in this first one, we'll also be putting that PDF link in the chat as well. So let's see, before we end and say thank you, if there's any other questions we need to address here. And Eddie, feel free to chime in if you see any that I'm missing. Are the students doing it at home or in class? So a lot of teachers are allotting time in class for students to do it, but they may not be meeting all their minutes in class, so they might have to do sometimes at home. Depends on the class. So something I would get in contact with your child's teacher about. How to log into iReady. So through the Twin Rivers apps portal, there's an iReady icon there. Your students should be familiar with how to do that as well. Okay, so with that, I think we will say thank you so much. You can turn to the last slide.
Allison, I finally got an answer for kindergarten.
Oh, good.
I had been sweating at that a little bit, but yes, kindergartners do not take the diagnostic, but they do have immediate access to the lessons. There is no set path because they haven't taken the diagnostic, but they can start working on where the program has set them to be. So,